I was 32 years old when I finally understood what my toxic family really thought I was worth. Not a daughter, not a sister, a wallet with a heartbeat. But I didn't know that yet, not on the night this story really begins. That night, I only knew one thing. My mother had texted me for the first time in 3 years, and I was about to walk into the most expensive trap of my life. Stay with me until the end, because what my father tried to do to me at that dinner table in front of 16 people is something you will not believe. And what I did back to him, that's the part everyone in my life still talks about. My name is Diana. I run 4 restaurant locations as a regional operations director. Together, those restaurants seat about 3,000 guests every single week. I built that career with my own 2 hands, starting at the very bottom. I was 17 years old when I got my first job. I was a table busser. I cleared plates, wiped down booths, and refilled water glasses for tips that sometimes added up to less than $20 a shift. Nobody handed me anything. I climbed 1 shift at a time, 1 promotion at a time for 15 years. And here's the thing about people who climb from the bottom. We don't forget where we came from. Even now, with a title, with a salary that would shock most of my relatives, I live a quiet life. I own a small condo, fully paid off. I drive a Honda that is 9 years old and still runs like a dream. My one indulgence, if you can even call it that, is ordering sparkling water when I eat out. That's it. That's my splurge. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because it matters for what happens later. Because the family I grew up in never saw my success as something I earned. They saw it as something I owed them. From the time I was 17, I was the fixer. Groceries when money got tight at home. I paid. My mother needed dental work she couldn't afford. I paid. My father's truck broke down again. I paid. My younger sister Brooke's wedding, the flowers, the dress, half the venue. I paid. There was a phrase in my family. My mother said it constantly, like a mantra, like a prayer. Family takes care of family. It sounded warm. It sounded like love. But in my house, that phrase only ever moved in one direction. Toward me, never from Anion back to me. For years, I told myself that was just how it worked. I was the responsible one. I was the one who made something of herself. Of course I helped. What kind of daughter wouldn't? My therapist, Dr. Kwan, was the first person who ever asked me a question that cracked that belief wide open. She asked me, Diana, when was the last time someone in your family helped you instead of the other way around? I sat in her office for a long time before I could answer. I couldn't remember, not once, not a single time in 15 years. Dr. Kwan told me something I've never forgotten. She said I had spent so many years being the fixer that I had trained my own toxic family to see my bank account as an endless resource. Not a person, a resource. And people don't feel gratitude toward a resource. They feel entitlement. I didn't want to believe her. But 3 years ago, I got proof. My sister Brooke decided she wanted to open a cafe. She had no business plan, no experience running a business, no savings to speak of. What she had was a $75,000 loan application and a form that needed a co-signer. She asked me to sign it. I asked her one simple question. Can I see your business plan? There wasn't one. I asked what her plan was if the cafe didn't turn a profit in the first year. She didn't have an answer for that either, so I said no. Not because I didn't love my sister. Because I had spent enough years around restaurants to know that a $75,000 loan without a plan wasn't hope. It was a slow motion disaster with Minami attached to it. My father did not see it that way. He called me 2 days later. He didn't ask questions. He didn't want a conversation. He told me that if I wasn't going to be part of the family in the way, that mattered, then I wasn't going to be part of the family at all. Within a week, I was removed from the family group chat. My calls went unanswered. My texts were left unread, then eventually blocked altogether. Birthdays came and went. Holidays came and went. 3 full years of silence from the people who raised me. I won't pretend that didn't hurt. It hurt more than almost anything I've ever lived through. But over those 3 years, something else happened too. I healed. I built a life that was quiet and steady and entirely my own. I stopped waiting by the phone. I stopped hoping for an apology that was never coming. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, 3 years of silence ended with a single text message from my mother. It read, "Sweetheart, we've missed you so much. Can we please have dinner, just the 4 of us? Me, your father, Brooke, and you. We want to reconnect. We want to heal." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me, the part that was still 17 years old and desperate for approval, wanted to believe every word of it. My mother suggested a restaurant called the Belvedere, an upscale place known for its wine list and its Wagyu beef. She promised it would be small, intimate, just the 4 of us. When I told my coworkers, Jess and Marco, about it the next morning, neither of them looked happy for me. Jess actually put her coffee down and said, "Diana, 3 years of nothing and now a sudden dinner invitation. That doesn't sound like healing to me. That sounds like a setup." Marco agreed. He told me, flat out, "Ambush dinners are a thing. Be careful." I heard them. I really did. But there was a part of me that needed to go anyway. Not because I trusted my family, because I needed closure one way or another. I needed to look my mother in the eye and know for certain whether anything had actually changed. The night of the dinner, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Belvedere for a full 10 minutes before I went inside. I wrote myself a note and stuck it right on my steering wheel, where I couldn't miss it walking back to my car. It said, "One dinner, then home." I thought that note was going to be my anchor for the evening. I had no idea it would become something closer to a warning I should have listened to twice as hard. Because as I walked across that parking lot toward the restaurant entrance, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There weren't 2 cars waiting for me. There weren't even 4. I counted 9 vehicles I recognized, cars belonging to aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. My mother had promised me a small family dinner, just the 4 of us. She had lied to me before I'd even walked through the door. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a few relatives had just stopped by to say hello. Maybe I was reading too much into 9 parked cars in a restaurant lot on a Friday night. I was wrong. So wrong that what waited for me inside that private dining room would change everything. I thought I knew about my toxic family, my own worth, and exactly how far some people will go when they think you're their last financial lifeline. What happened next, I could never have prepared for. And neither could they honestly prepare for what I was about to do in return. 9 cars in that parking lot should have sent me straight back to my Honda. Instead, I walked through the front doors of the Belvedere and let the hostess lead me toward the private dining room in the back. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself my toxic family had actually changed. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The hostess pushed open a set of double doors, and the noise hit me before anything else did. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low roar of a party already in full swing. I stepped inside, and my mother's promise of just the 4 of us fell apart in an instant. There were 16 people seated around a long table. Aunts, uncles, cousins, distant relatives I hadn't seen since childhood weddings. The table itself looked like something out of a magazine. Lobster tails stacked on silver trays, Wagyu beef sliders arranged in neat little rows, an entire spread of charcuterie. And in the center, already half empty, sat a bottle of Bordeaux wine that I happened to know from years of working in restaurants, cost close to $400. They had clearly been eating and drinking for a while before I even walked in. Someone spotted me at the door, and the whole table erupted into applause. My mother stood up arms wide, tears already forming in her eyes, calling out how happy she was that her baby girl had finally come home. It looked, for all the world, like a warm family reunion. It felt like something else entirely. It felt staged. I sat down where my mother pointed, right between her and my father, at the head of a table, loaded with more food than any 4 people could ever eat. My father greeted me by handing his credit card, quite dramatically, to the waiter, and announcing another round of lobster and wine for the table. He waved that card around like a trophy. But here's what my father didn't know I noticed. Underneath his expensive show, the cracks were everywhere. His truck, in the parking lot, had a dented door he clearly hadn't been able to afford to fix. My mother's designer purse, the one she used to show off, was held together at the seam with a safety pin. Something was very wrong in my parents' finances, and somehow I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out exactly what. Throughout dinner, the compliments from my relatives came wrapped in knives. An aunt mentioned how nice it must be to have money to burn while the rest of the family struggles. A cousin asked, loud enough for the table to hear, if I even remembered what it felt like to worry about a bill. My uncle raised his glass and toasted to family loyalty, staring directly at me while he said it. Through all of it, I ordered exactly one thing. Sparkling water. It's the one small luxury I allow myself when I eat out, and that night, it felt like the only honest thing at that entire table. Our waiter that night was a young man named Nathan, no older than 19, running himself ragged trying to keep up with 16 demanding guests by himself. I watched him refill glasses, take endless orders, apologize for delays that weren't his fault. I recognized that exhaustion. I used to leave it every single shift back when I was 17. So between courses, I made a point of thanking him, of telling him he was doing an incredible job. He looked at me like a nobody at that table, had said a kind word to him all night. Nobody had. At some point, I excused myself to find the restroom. On my way back, I passed a service counter near the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. My sister Brooke's phone left behind, screen lit up with a fresh notification. I want to tell you I didn't look. I want to tell you I respected her privacy and walked away. I didn't. Because the notification banner across the top of her screen read, "Dinner plan," a group chat between my mother, my father, and my sister. And the message underneath made my stomach drop straight through the floor. I opened it. What I read in that group chat over the next 60 seconds rewrote everything I thought I understood about that evening. My mother had written days earlier that if they invited enough relatives and ordered the good stuff, Diana would never dare cause a scene in front of everyone. She wouldn't say no, not in public, not with that many eyes on her. Mi Fater had replied that the bank was already threatening legal action over his failed business. That between his collapsed company and my mother's maxed out credit lines, they needed a way out, and fast. My sister, apparently feeling generous with the family secrets, had added that her cafe, the one I refused to co-sign a loan for 3 years ago, had quietly failed after only 11 months. She hadn't told a single relative at that table. Not one. And then I read the line that made everything click into place. My mother had written that once Diana pays off tonight's dinner and gets guilted into helping more, they could count on my money getting them through spring. I stood there in that hallway holding my sister's phone, and I felt something I did not expect, not rage, not tears, just an eerie, complete calm. Because for the first time in 3 years, I finally understood exactly what that dinner invitation had really been. Not an apology, not healing, a trap, built entirely out of lobster tails and expensive wine, engineered to corner me in front of 16 witnesses, so I would feel too humiliated to refuse paying a bill that was already climbing past $4,000. My toxic family hadn't invited me back into their lives. They had invited me back into their debt. I set the phone down exactly where I found it and walked back to that table with a smile on my face, because two could play at pretending everything was fine. For the rest of the meal, I asked careful, quiet questions. I asked Brooke how the cafe was doing and watched her stammer through a vague non-answer about the market being tough. I asked my father about his business and watched him wave off the question with excuses about the economy. After her third glass of that $400 Bordeaux, Brooke got sloppy. She leaned toward me, grinning, and said the words that confirmed everything I'd already read. "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating tonight." I smiled back at her. I didn't say a word. I let my father order dessert. I let the wine keep flowing. I let 16 relatives keep congratulating themselves on a scheme they thought was already working. Because I was no longer the 17-year-old girl desperate for her family's approval. I was a woman who ran 4 restaurant locations and understood exactly how a bill like this worked, exactly who a card on file belonged to, and exactly what I was about to do next. My father leaned across the table near the end of the meal, wiped his mouth, and looked directly at me. The whole table went quiet, like they'd all been waiting for this exact moment all night. "You're paying, right?" he said. "You owe us that much." 16 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I want you to imagine that moment. The room going silent. Every relative who had spent the evening taking shots at my success now staring at me, waiting for the daughter they'd disowned 3 years ago to open her wallet one more time. What I said back to my father in that dining room is something none of them saw coming. And what I did 5 minutes later, quietly, calmly, without a single raised voice, was about to blow their entire plan apart in front of everyone they'd invited to witness it. But you'll have to see for yourself what happened when that check finally hit the table. "You owe us that much." Those 5 words hung in the air over a table loaded with empty lobster shells and a nearly finished bottle of $400 Bordeaux. 16 relatives sat there, watching me, waiting for the daughter my toxic family had disowned 3 years ago to reach for her wallet one more time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply smiled, excused myself from the table, and said I needed a moment. What I did next took less than 5 minutes, and it changed the entire outcome of that night. I walked straight to the service station near the kitchen, where I found the floor manager, David, standing beside Nathan, our waiter. I kept my voice calm and low, the same voice I use every single day managing 4 restaurant locations back home. I told them exactly 2 sentences. "I'm not the host tonight, and I won't be covering this table. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head of the table. His card is already on file for the reservation." David nodded immediately. He'd clearly handled situations like this before. I could see the relief on Nathan's face too, like he'd sensed all evening that something about this table wasn't right. Then I did one more thing. I quietly paid for my own sparkling water separately, in cash. And I added a 30% tip just for Nathan, because that kid had run himself ragged for 16 demanding strangers, and he deserved to be seen. I walked back to the table and sat down like nothing had happened. My family had no idea their entire plan had just collapsed. A few minutes later, Nathan approached the table carrying a black leather folder. My father's chest actually puffed up a little as he reached for it, ready to perform generosity one last time in front of an audience of 16 relatives. He opened the folder, saw the total, and I watched his confident smile falter for just a second before he covered it back up. He pulled out a credit card and handed it to Nathan with a flourish. We waited. Nathan came back a moment later, apologetic, and said quietly that the card had been declined. My father laughed it off, blamed some kind of bank error, and pulled out a second card. Declined again. The table, which had been loud and celebratory all evening, went dead silent. My mother's smile cracked. Brooks suddenly found her wine glass very interesting. My father tried a third card, his hands visibly less steady this time, and the answer from the machine was the same. 3 cards, 3 declines, in front of every single relative they had invited specifically to pressure me into paying. My father turned to me, and for the first time all night, the performance was completely gone. What was left underneath it was raw panic. "Diana," he said, "please, you have to help us. You owe us that much." My mother started crying. The kind of tears that come fast and loud when someone wants an audience to see them. She called me ungrateful. She said after everything they'd done for me, this was how I repaid them. I looked around that table, at the empty lobster shells, at the half-finished $400 wine, at 16 relatives who, only an hour earlier, had been making snide comments about my success, and who now sat frozen, watching my family's financial collapse play out in real time. Then I looked at my mother and I asked her the only question that mattered. "You always told me family takes care of family," I said. "So why was I the only one who ever did?" Nobody at that table had an answer for me. Not my mother, not my father, not Brooke, who suddenly discovered something fascinating about the tablecloth in front of her. I told them, calmly, that I wasn't going to pay for a dinner I never agreed to host that was built entirely around ambushing me in public. But I also told them I wasn't walking away out of spite. I offered to sit down with them and a financial counselor to help them build a real plan to get back on their feet, not a bailout. A real plan, the kind built on honesty instead of manipulation. My father didn't want a plan. He wanted a payment. And when it became clear I wasn't going to give him one, the mask of the loving, reconnecting father from that text message 3 weeks ago disappeared completely. I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked out of the Belvedere without looking back. I didn't slam a door. I didn't raise my voice. I simply left the same way I'd arrived, quietly on my own terms. Out in the parking lot, I found that sticky note still stuck to my steering wheel. "One dinner, then home." I sat in my car for a moment, and instead of the guilt I expected to feel, I felt something closer to peace. I had gone looking for closure that night, and in the strangest way possible, I had actually found it. The next morning, I removed myself from that family group chat for good, not blocked in anger, just quietly, permanently gone. In the months that followed, I heard bits and pieces through relatives who still spoke to me. My father's business never recovered. My parents were eventually forced to sell the house I grew up in and move into a much smaller place across town. Brooks Cafe, the one I refused to co-sign a loan for, stayed closed exactly like I feared it would 3 years earlier when there was never a real business plan behind it. I won't pretend there isn't a small, sad part of me that wishes things had gone differently, that my family had actually wanted to reconnect instead of wanting my bank account back. But I've learned something important since that night at the Belvedere. Love that only shows up when it needs something from you was never love to begin with. It was a transaction wearing love's clothing. My therapist, Dr. Kwan, told me once that boundaries aren't cruel, they're honest. And that night, sitting across from 16 relatives and a father demanding I pay for my own ambush, I finally understood exactly what she meant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't need to. 2 quiet sentences to a floor manager did more damage to my toxic family scheme than any argument ever could have. So, let me ask you something before you go. If your own family tried to corner you in a room full of people, expecting you to pay for a trap you never agreed to walk into, would you have paid? Or would you have done exactly what I did and let the bill land exactly where it belonged? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.